Today is the 22nd of February 2017, and I'm here to interview Joe Sent. Joe, could I begin by asking you when you were born, please?
The 20th of March 1937.
And where were you born?
I was born in Valenciennes in the north of France.
And was your name at birth Joe Sent?
No, it was Joseph Centnersfer.
Thank you. So that doesn't sound a French name.
No, my parents were both from Warsaw and had settled in and married in France.
And did they do that long before the Nazis?
Yes, they did that in the 1920s. They came to France. My father to the Sorbonne, and then as he was finishing his education, he sent for his fiancée, my mother, and he married a civil wedding in Aubervilliers, which I think is just a suburb of Paris.
And I assume he intended to stay in France.
Oh, yes. In fact, he had already applied for French citizenship when the war broke out.
So what did happen then when the war broke out? You were still very young.
Yes, I was 3 when the Germans invaded France in 1940. So my father was an engineer employed in the locomotive industry in the north of France. And there were many Polish workers in factories and mines in the north of France. And he had settled there. He decided, he left Poland because of anti-Semitism.
I see. And then what happened after that? How did he end up here in Britain?
Well, he was called up by the Polish forces. He had already served in the Polish army when he was at university in Warsaw. He was part of a cadet force in 1920 that fought against the Bolshevik invasion of Poland after the Russian Revolution, when the Bolsheviks tried to take back the Baltic states. Interesting period in history today.
And how old was he when he was called up then?
He was born in 1898.
Right, so he was over 40 when he was called up.
Yes, I mean, I think I came late in their lives. But I know that because of the war, they decided not to have any more children because they didn't have any place to stay, really, when
so he
moved.
He was called up?
He was called up by the Polish forces in France, and he was a second lieutenant, and my father had decided that we should move to some safe place away from the front, which was approaching through Belgium. But during the course of our escape, we escaped, I remember it was in some kind of furniture van with other families. And I've been back to the house and stood in the entrance and seen the stairs. I fell down the stairs when we were leaving, I remember. These, 3-year-old memories are only dramatic moments. That was one. And escaping in this van was something else. And somewhere along the line at a station where the Polish troops were going onto a train and my mother was saying goodbye to my father, another officer approached my father and said, "What are you doing saying goodbye to your wife and child for? Get them on the train, we're leaving the country."
And that's why you didn't hide in
That's
France?
Why we didn't go to our the safe house, of course, was somewhere in the south, which would have been under Vichy, which wouldn't have helped.
Right, yes, you'd have been arrested.
Yes.
So that saved your life?
Yes.
And your mother came then here to Scotland?
Yes, we came on troop ships. There were 2 Polish liners, the Stefan Batory and this Jan Sobieski were Polish liners, and they anchored off the French port of Saint-Jean-de-Luz near Biarritz, and the French fishermen ferried the Polish troops, and any wives and children that were with them, they were ferried out. They had only to ferry out military, and so my mother apparently wore an army greatcoat with me underneath, carrying me, and
so she hid you.
Quite a few Polish wives that my mother kept friends with throughout her life escaped on these ships, and they took 4 or 5 days to sail from Saint-Jean-de-Luz out into the Atlantic, avoiding U-boats, and they came into Plymouth, I think, on the 25th or 26th of June. I have all these dates written somewhere, which I think are precisely noted in a previous recording that I made of my story.
It's amazing. And what about the rest of your extended family? Do you know what happened to them?
Yes. Well, my father had a brother and a sister. The sister stayed in Warsaw, so she disappeared in the ghetto. My father's brother escaped to Białystok with his wife and daughter, where they were, of course, arrested by the invading Soviet troops then, who had invaded Poland. They were given a choice of becoming Soviet citizens or remaining Polish. They decided to remain Polish, were then arrested and transported on cattle trains, goods trucks, to Siberia and to slave labour. They were with many other similar families who were in slave labour until Germany attacked the Soviet Union, and then they were free, and they travelled through what was then Georgia and Persia, and after the war they ended up in a displaced persons camp somewhere near Paris, and from there they went to Australia. And that was where my father found them, through the Red Cross in Australia.
Right. And all that happened because they were Polish, not because they were Jewish.
That's right. And then my mother had 2 brothers. One was last seen in the ghetto at the uprising, the Jewish uprising. In Warsaw. And the other one had got married to a communist and went to the Soviet Union before the war and just disappeared. Don't know what happened to him.
I see. So, going back to your own personal story, what happened once you were here in Britain?
Yes, well, the Polish army were... I have seen a TV programme on aspects of the northeast of Scotland, a nature programme, and it showed you the Polish troops coming off ships being transferred to trains and taken up to the northeast of Scotland. And they were taken up there to defend the beaches against invasion by the Germans from Norway. They were all near in Fife, and the beaches up there, they built barricades against invasion. And you can still see some of these barricades. I've been up there and had a look. And even in the forest, Tentsmuir in the forest, there's a track in the forest called the Polish Road. So my father was in, they had tents. I've got old black and white photos. And the military were camped there. And my father was in charge of troops building defences. And we were put into billet accommodation in London. And somehow the government, our local government, decided on who had more space in their house to take families, refugees. And we were billeted with a lady in Notting Hill for a time. And I think the government supplied funds to feed us. I mean, that's just stories my mother used to tell me as a child. So we were then moved around and ended up in the northeast of Scotland and met up with my father.
See, and so you were with him for some of the war?
For some of the war, yes.
In army accommodation?
In billets.
Right.
But civilian houses where the government decided if they could take people. And the government would just tell them, that's it. Well, I forget what the word is for that. But they just, it was a government decree, and so some government official would be looking at all the houses and decided which ones had room to take people.
And your father, did he remain on coastal duty for the rest of the war?
Yes, he moved around a bit in Scotland, and we tried to sort of follow somewhere. And he wasn't demobbed until I think about 1947, quite a long time after war, and got work in Glasgow, and that's why we came to Glasgow.
And by this time, did your mother speak English?
She did, but she never went to proper classes. No. And when we came here, I was very quick to learn English. Being, I went to school at 4, and without any English, but I think it came quite quick at that age.
And at home, did you speak English or Polish? French. Oh, French, of course. Of course.
But then subsequently, because my mother moved in Polish circles with the wives of other Polish army personnel and Polish military friends that my father had, I learned Polish.
So tell me what happened once you came to Glasgow. You'd have gone to school here.
I went to school in Glasgow. We lived in East End, Glasgow. My father worked in Springburn in the locomotive industry, in North British Locomotive Company. He was a diesel locomotive designer. And we were there until the company bought 3 large houses in the West End and divided them into flats for staff. And my father got, in 1948, got one of these flats, and that's the first time I had lived in a home with just my parents and not sharing, toilets and kitchens. I thought that was a norm. And I had a room of my own, at 11, amazing. And
once you were here, your father had no desire to go back to France?
Oh, no. And also he took ill during the war, and he ended up in hospital, and he died while I was still at school, still quite young. But we'd set out to purchase the flat. They were selling the flats off to staff, and he'd managed to raise a mortgage or something. Anyway, we stayed on in that property down in Clevedon Drive.
And your mother then was a single parent?
Yes.
And that would have been...
Yeah, a bit of a struggle, yeah. However, the NB Local were very good. They said when I was 16, I could come and serve an apprenticeship, and they would train me and send me to day release and evening classes and continue my education, and I would serve an engineering apprenticeship at the same time. So that was quite good.
Very, very good.
So that's what happened to me.
And were you conscious you were a refugee?
Not at all. No. Not until I came to a function with one of your members who was a family friend, or her parents had been friends with my parents. And she said she was going to this AGR meeting, and I forget the subject, but she thought it would interest me. And I said, oh yes, I'll come along. And then suddenly people told me I was a refugee. Where are you from? You see, because I came from the west end of Glasgow, that was like, might as well have come from the Soviet Union. So there I was. And, well, I became a member, and here I am.
And what about your mother? You must have been aware that she hadn't been born in Scotland.
Oh, yes. Oh, no, I knew my mother's story. But you know, as a child, I wasn't probing enough. And so there was more. I did learn a lot than just listening to my parents. But, you know, I didn't ask the questions. And then she died, and too late to ask the questions.
And how did she, do you know whether she liked it here in Scotland? How did she cope with being here?
She coped. Yeah. I mean, we were alive. And my father was earning okay. The problem came afterwards when he died, you know, widow's pension, and then I wasn't getting a lot of money, and it was hard. Yeah, but look at what I've got now.
Great. So tell me what happened. Did you continue as an engineer?
I did, until things were not going well with that company. They were relying a lot on export orders to former empire countries, the Commonwealth. And a lot of these countries were starting to develop their own locomotive industries. And I had become quite involved in the scout movement. I'd been a cub and a scout, and I became a scouting officer with a group in Springburn. And I thought I seemed to relate well with young people, and I thought I might like to go into education. And I applied to Jordan Hill to join a course for people from different industries. And they were running this course for technical teachers. And I was interviewed, and they took me on.
Was this a new thing in teaching technical teachers?
Don't think so.
No.
No.
They were bringing people in from industry.
There seemed to be a shortage, and they were looking for people from industry with practical skills.
And at this time, did you mix with other Polish people or people of Polish-French descent?
I did. My mother was a member of there was a Polish club. There were two Polish clubs. There was a ex-combatants club, which was really ex-soldiers. And then there was the Sikorsky club, which is more, let's say, more intellectual pastimes with lectures and classes and things like that. Whereas I think the old combatants was just a wee den for the ex-soldiers. And
did you join her?
Sometimes, yes, I would go with her, yes. And I know that I visited Poland a couple of times, and I took photographs, and then I had slides. I would do evenings with colour slides on what, because these are Polish people who wouldn't go back to Poland because it was communist. But these things didn't bother me then. I found it fascinating to go to communist countries.
Yes, I'll ask you about that in a minute. Tell me more about teaching. Did you stay long as a teacher?
I was 25 years, and until I retired. I went through several illustrious academies in Glasgow.
And where did you finish up?
Govan High School.
And did you enjoy teaching there?
I did. I enjoyed teaching everywhere. I would say I was a strict disciplinarian. And also I liked to do extracurricular activities, and that's where I made a lot of, I had it easier in school. I would do hill walking and skiing and sailing, whatever things were doing, you know, so I could spend some of my weekends arranging things. And latterly, for safety reasons, teachers who ran extracurricular activities had, because there had been some accidents with deaths, they said unqualified people couldn't run things. So they agreed the corporation and the education department agreed to put you through a course to instructor level in any one field. And at that time I was doing sailing. So I went to Blair Varick and became a sailing instructor. I got my RYA sailing instructor certificate, and I could then continue running these. Where it paid off was quite good, because just a couple of months ago, one of these former pupils got in touch with me, and two of them came up for an evening here. And what was interesting about these, they had both been in the sailing club when I was teaching in Drumchapel. And these two former pupils were age 63. That's a bit of a shock. So we had a very nice evening.
Would be a shock. And I gather, I can see you're still very energetic. I gather you didn't just stop and retire and watch television.
No, I went to work in a very well-known hi-fi company in Eaglesham, and I did drawings on their computer-aided drafting system, mechanical drawings for their electronic components. I was there for just over 3 years. And then I saw that there was somebody looking for a company that was sending tourists to the new countries, that when the Berlin Wall fell down, they were opening up the old Soviet Union and the satellites, and they were looking for people with languages and experience of these countries to take young people and show them around. So I did that.
For how long did you do that, Joe?
15 years.
Oh my goodness.
Just.
And did you see huge changes as you did that over that period?
Oh, especially at the beginning was the most exciting, because there was a breakdown in law and order. And so you were dealing with criminals a lot. And that became quite exciting.
Criminals who were working in the tourist industry?
There were criminals who ran things. It was a mafia, and you had to pay the mafia.
And did that reduce then over these 15 years?
Well, I think Mr. Putin has it organised his way now. Whether you would call it mafia or not, I don't know, but it has changed. But whether there's still corruption or not, I haven't been there since 2005.
I don't know. I haven't asked you about your family life. Did you marry?
Well, I did. I married in 1968.
And family?
And 2 sons. My 2 sons on the mantelpiece here, my 2 sons. And that's it. And I've got grandchildren now, 3 in south side of Glasgow and 1 in Dubai.
And do your grandchildren know about the history of your family?
Well, they're pretty young. Certainly, I think the ones in the south side are at school now, and their father has told them. But they're pretty young for that. And certainly the one in Dubai is only 4.5.
And the Jewish element of your background, did that make a difference to how you proceeded here in Scotland? Or?
Well, my parents weren't religious. And we had friends, some were Jewish and some weren't. And then, well, I knew I was Jewish, but I didn't go to synagogue or anything like that.
And did it make any difference to your ability to become Scottish? Did you meet any prejudice because of that background? Well,
I've always met prejudice because they didn't think I was Jewish, and so people were quite outspoken in my presence, especially when I was travelling in places like Poland and Russia. I met a lot of anti-Jewish comments. Yeah, because they thought, well, this guy's from Scotland. They didn't think that there were Jews in Scotland. So I found it quite interesting to hear all these different points of view. But I certainly stopped one guide from getting any employment because he didn't know that I was Jewish, and he was Austrian. They were worst. The Austrians were the worst, and he was going on about this Jewish neighbourhood in Vienna and all these Jews this and Jews that, and I knew there were Jews in the tour group. So he was just being secretive and whispering all these terrible things to me. So of course I took it all in. I made sure he didn't get any more work.
And here in Scotland?
Here in Scotland, yes, you hear it. Yeah. It's not bothered me. Hasn't. I don't think I've had any trouble. Yeah.
And do you ever regret that you weren't brought up as a Frenchman?
Not really. No, I didn't think too much. I was too busy just getting on with my life to worry what might have been. Yes, I haven't thought about that much. Not really.